This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Bartholomew Town Podcast. I'm Bill Bartholomew. A pleasure to have you on board as always. Today, I welcome in Republican congressional candidate Allan Fung. And of course, Allan Fung, the 12-year mayor of Cranston, two-time gubernatorial candidate for the Republicans here in Rhode Island, trying to make a case that, frankly, change is needed. That's really the fundamental tenet of his campaign, is that things aren't working. You know, the recession may be coming. We're looking at high gas prices. Food prices are going up, other commodities, so on and so forth. And not only from the Rhode Island-oriented perspective, but also, of course, on a national level, there needs to be a change of leadership in terms of government control. So that's the fundamental of his campaign. He's not out there, you know, and I've heard plenty of times where he's answered questions on specifics with, you know, abortion and things of that nature. Today's interview was more focused on, okay, you're putting it out there that you're running on gas prices, you're running on food prices, you're running on things of this sort. You've put it out there that you want to serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee. You've put it out there that you are, you want to see a fresh face in terms of a presidential candidate in 2024 for the Republican side. So let's go deeper on those issues. We could have spent 5 hours in here. And hopefully the next time that Mayor Fung's back on, in the general, we'll be able to take a harder look at some of the specific areas, you know, abortion, gay marriage. These are things that are highly concerning for so many people here in Rhode Island and beyond, that if a Republican-controlled Congress were in place, there could be some risk there in terms of, you know, obviously with some of the SCOTUS decisions that we've seen and are concerned about, that there could be risk if there were a Republican-controlled Congress. And that plays into many, many different areas. But for today, this interview, highly specific to the things that Allan is out running on. That's really where I wanted to go with it. So hopefully you're able to learn more about this race from this interview. If you're not familiar with Allan Fung, you'll be able to get a sense of where he's coming from. And look, you'll hear the Trump question. And you'll hear it framed in a number of different ways, and how Allan is managing that. Look, let's be honest about it. You know, I asked Ashley Kalis this earlier this year after a gubernatorial debate, would you accept Donald Trump's endorsement? She didn't answer it. I asked the Republican candidate for general treasurer here in Rhode Island, James Lathrop, if he would accept Donald Trump's endorsement. He answered it. He said he wouldn't. So there are two stripes of Republicans right now, at least here in Rhode Island, that, really one of the prime meridians in that division is the Trump question. So I think and know, actually, that it's a valid question that needs to be answered. And I don't know that a Republican will succeed in Rhode Island if they're not able to, obviously they need to retain the red base, but in terms of winning over independent votes, I don't know how you do that if you don't answer the Trump question clearly and concisely. So you can be the judge for yourself today here as Allan answers those questions as well. As always, thanks for your support. If you have a question that you'd like to have a candidate answer, send me an email or tweet at me at Bill Bartholomew. My email address is bill@ripodcast.com. Hey guys, with the increasing legalization of cannabis across the country, including most recently here in Rhode Island, the cannabis industry is growing at an accelerating pace. If you are already in the industry or wondering what is the best path to break into the cannabis field, well, the University of Rhode Island has a program to help educate you in the evolving space. Fully accredited by URI's College of Pharmacy, the online certificate program covers topics related to product development, chemical analysis and testing, and patient and customer therapeutics. The application deadline for the fall session is August 2nd, coming right up, and courses start on September 6th. Learn more at uri.edu/online/cannabis or give them a call at 401-874-5280. All right, so we are here with congressional candidate, former Cranston mayor, and gubernatorial candidate Allan Fung.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for having me in the studio.
Yeah, it's nice to be in person. I mean, let's be honest about it. COVID's not over. I know a lot of people are still, they're coming down with symptoms, sometimes not super severe, but it's at least we found a way to navigate this.
Absolutely, and that's what I miss. Those people interactions, people yelling from the other room that's kind of coming in. You miss that. In the past 2.5 years, the interactions amongst people. Sometimes you take that stuff for granted, but it's definitely nice to be back in studio, face to face, and talking to your listeners.
How's it been for you running for Congress out and about in the district? You're obviously, well liked in Cranston, and you've built a base, you've built a brand that's undeniable on a statewide basis. What's the reaction been, just gut level, as you've gone around and met people and more so tried to say to people who maybe have voted Democrat or independent and try to say, hey, come to my camp?
Yeah, it's been phenomenal on the trail. As you know, when I left Cranston, because of term limits after 12 years, I left with a very high approval rating. You don't usually see that after that length of time, but people know about the work that I've done, working across the aisle. They trust in, what I've done to turn Cranston around, make it what it is, one of the best places to live. And that hallmark has lasted all throughout this time. So as I'm hitting the stores, talking to people at many of the fairs, the events that are going on within the district, they know who I am. But most importantly, they're coming up and talking to me about what's going on in their lives, because we're hitting a time right now where the number one issue, Bill, when I tell you the number one issue and almost only issue that I get, interacted upon with people is this economy. It's a cost of living crisis right now that we're hearing about, where we're talking about gas prices, going over $5. Oh, we have a little relief when it pops back down into the $4. That's not right. We're coming into, we're in the summertime right now, but we're going to be coming into our fall and winter season where people on fixed incomes, our seniors are going to have to make those difficult decisions with home heating oil about how they're going to heat their home. Because if this keeps up, they're going to be facing those devastating choices. Am I going to heat my home? How am I going to afford my groceries, because it's still skyrocketed? And when we're talking about also prescription medications, those are difficult choices that people on fixed incomes are going to have to face coming into the winter. They're facing it now, and it's going to get worse unless we change it. That's what I hear on the trail, and it's nice that people know and trust, me and what I've done in Cranston, and that's what I'm going to highlight.
Well, how do you solve it?
There's a lot of things that we can do. First and foremost, we have to be energy independent again. And this is coming from a guy that believes in renewables, properly sited renewables. You've seen my track record in Cranston, putting solar panels on, some of our public projects like at the high school, putting solar panels on, the Capuano landfill. Those are projects I support. But as we transition, we've got to walk and chew gum at the same time, make sure that some of those drilled but uncompleted wells are put back into production. We can't afford to flip the switch overnight, and this is what's causing this huge, spike in prices that we see. Second, we got to control and rein in the inflation that's going on, the overspending that's going on in Congress, this Congress that's led by Nancy Pelosi and being driven by the Biden administration. Spending's out of control. When we're talking about park projects, $200 million for Nancy Pelosi's Presidio Park, that's the stuff that I'm adept at, and I've shown in 12 years as mayor that I can be laser focused on budgets, cutting out the fat, making sure that we have targeted spending that comes back to us that'll help develop jobs. I want investments into Quonset Point to help support many of the industry this year. I want research dollars coming back to help support our blue economy. That's what, a vote for Allan Fung will bring back to Rhode Island, but make sure that we drive down inflation, make sure we become energy independent. Those are priorities right now.
Senator Whitehouse introduced, it's called the big oil windfall tax. Basically, he wants to, tax profits that are coming from big oil companies. Do you support something like that to sort of reinvest? I understand it's controlling the flow of capitalism at a certain level, but do you support those sort of, I don't even know how to frame it properly, but dialing back in profits that are returned to the people, so to speak?
You know what's, I knew that question was coming because guess who supports that? One of my potential opponents,
Sure.
That silver spoon, Seth Magaziner. And you know what is very disturbing about Seth's policies and, the progressive left's policies when they're talking about, taxing people in these very difficult times, whether it's companies or individuals? It's wrong. We've got to make sure that at this point in time, we're watching our spending. If we can level or cut taxes, we've got to, those are the policies that I would support, and make sure that we're energy independent. You got Seth Magaziner talking, not only supporting that bill, but you know what else he's come out in support of? the TCI tax on gasoline. He's on record for that. This is the wrong policy to send, for Rhode Islanders, and that's not the type of individual we should be sending to Washington, D.C. I will make sure that we're energy independent, because that's how we're going to drive prices of gasoline and oil down.
So it's a combination of installing, as you say, properly sited, whether it's brownfields or whatever it may be, solar panels, wind turbines, things of this sort, maybe even wave-powered energy.
I'm a big proponent of hydro. You saw that during the gubernatorial campaigns when we were talking about alternative energies. Hydro's another one that I could be supporting. There's a lot of great new technologies that are there as we adapt, but you're not going to be able to transition this overnight. That's why, the first step that we can take in this approach is those DUCs, those drilled but uncompleted wells. Get that back into production. This Biden administration has slowed, even if not put a halt to many of these projects because of the regulatory burdens, the red tape that I'm efficient as mayor to cut through. And that's what I want to do down in Washington, D.C. for Rhode Islanders. We got to make sure that we put some of that oil back into our own pipelines and make sure it stays here, because what's disastrous? When you're talking about Joe Biden, this administration, he talked about tapping the reserves a few weeks ago. And you know what's sad about it? It's not just tapping the reserves to help us as Americans. He was sending some of that overseas. That's ridiculous. These policies have to help us within our own country. We're seeing skyrocketing inflation. We're seeing, potentially on the precipice of a recession because of these policies. We can't afford that as Americans, and that's why I'm running. I know what to do, to focus on making these cuts, to, some of this out of control spending, making sure that we become energy independent. But most importantly, we have to also make some of our products here. That's why, I've always been on the trail talking about the CHIPS Act. We have to get manufacturing back here so that we're not reliant upon, instability in other countries, dictators in other countries. It was sad that we saw our president, ignore one of his campaign promises, going over to Saudi Arabia to try to bring oil back here. That stuff's got to stop. If we become the country that we once were, then that's going to have us continue economically chugging along.
Some of the pipeline and even drilling conversations revolve around environmental awareness, sovereign nations, indigenous folks who they're concerned about pipelines going through their lands. How do you manage that? How do you balance that? And then, a lot of these pipelines as well, the Keystone Pipeline, things like that, it's not like you can turn that on and, it's going to be at your local Shell station next week. How do you plan for the short term with a lot of these projects?
And that's a big part of the problem, because as soon as, Joe Biden got in office, he stopped that project, a project that, had already gone through that process, was going through that process that, what's funny? The Democrats talk about supporting middle-class American workers, right? That's always been their mantra. Well, guess what he did in that one fell swoop, stopping that project? Helping the American workers, that are part of that process of building that pipeline. And that's what's sad about what's missing with this Democratic Progressive Party right now. They're forgetting the middle-class workers, guys like you and I that are, going along every single day. That's what we have to continue doing. And yes, there are a lot of, hurdles that come in any type of project when you're talking about oil or even developments that go on, within Rhode Island and our backyards. But these things can be overcome if you sit at the table. And this is one of the specialties that I've had. You've seen it, Bill, during my 12-year career. Difficult issues that people never thought we could tackle. Pension reform. We had the second worst funded pension plan in the state. But it was one that I knew we had to tackle. And how I did it, I sat across the table, not just from our police and fire unions, but retirees who aren't represented, working through sound facts, listening to them, to their stories, coming to a compromise that can work. And that's what we have to bring back to Washington, D.C. right now. Get off the extremes, get off the dialogues, sit across the table, and let's get some stuff done that'll help our country, help our residents, not just across the USA, but in Rhode Island, in the 2nd Congressional District, and that's what I want to bring back to Washington, D.C.
In Cranston, your successor, Ken Hopkins, recently had to scale back, essentially shrink government in certain positions. There's concerns about the fiscal status of Cranston, and Mayor Hopkins has said that that's not on you specifically in a question a few months ago on this matter, but shrinking government, sometimes that impacts the same jobs, the same union jobs that you speak of in terms of the middle class. How do you square that?
Yeah, I can tell you right now, just in Cranston, when I left Cranston, it was in sound financial shape. And that's not just me talking about it. Go back to the audits, because as you know, anytime there's a red flag, it's late audits. Well, our audits were always on time. And you can open up those audits and see that I left with a multi-million-dollar rainy day fund. We had the highest bond rating amongst all three of the rating agencies the city's had in decades. And by the way, I was making 100% of that, pension ARC, the annual required contribution, on my way out the door, because I know that that's a problem that's been strangling Cranston for years. So financially, we're in the right shape. Ken's facing some difficult headwinds, and that's why he's had to make some difficult decisions. Let's take a look at what he's faced. We're coming out of COVID, and COVID devastated revenues, not just in Cranston, but across the country, many cities and towns, many governmental budgets. So, he's faced with that. He made a commitment, just like I did, to our schools, not just with school construction, which, we all know it's not free money. It's costs that come that you as taxpayers and us as government officials have to pay back. And lastly, it's difficult inflationary times, because not only were those school instruction costs hit by those inflationary prices, but the general cost of services go up. So Ken's doing the responsible thing, what he can, to try to manage his budget, because he's used federal funds, and you want to make sure that when those federal funds dry out, it's not put back on the taxpayers all in one shot. So he's trying to manage the best he can throughout these difficult times.
Yeah, and that's a question that comes up often, is what about federal funds that went to Cranston in that sense? But again, that's not you. That's a Ken Hopkins matter now, so I think it's only fair to ask him about the current management of that money.
Right. And he's I know he's going to be putting into other projects too, throughout the city that are, one-time projects, that's going to be a decision that he and the council are going to have to make. I'm sitting back to do what I can when I'm down in Washington, D.C., hopefully, knock on wood, that we're going to support, not just infrastructure projects in Cranston, but in Warwick, all throughout the 2nd District, all throughout Rhode Island, because we need to have sound investment dollars, targeted investment dollars. I want to bring back, like I mentioned before, dollars into Quonset to build back that infrastructure, because we're seeing a thriving kind of system coming down, up and down Narragansett Bay, not just the Quonset, but all the way even down to the Providence Port, East Providence. We have to do what we can to bring back those investments to support many of those manufacturers and businesses there. I want to make sure that the dollars are targeted for our blue economy that's up and coming. The research that's being done at our flagship institution, URI, that's important. I want to support them, what they're looking to do. And our thriving already green economy that's here. We want to continue have that robust economy, so it's a blue, green in our existing manufacturing economy. We do that. That's jobs for those middle-class people, for those hard-working people that this Democratic Progressive Party have just forgotten about, because they're the ones that are paying the bills, and that's who I'm going to go down representing and be a voice of.
A couple of minutes on foreign policy. It's something you expressed interest in terms of if you were elected, a committee assignment perhaps. This is a generic question, and it's so nuanced that we could spend 4 hours probably breaking it down. But what role should the U.S. play in terms of, one, serving as the global hegemon, and number two, when you look at certain conflicts right now, look at Israel-Palestine right now, looking in Africa, looking in China, Taiwan, whatever it may be, how does that role translate into action that's public-facing, that's behind the scenes? If you were in Congress, and you were certainly, if you were on foreign affairs, you would have to make some decisions. There's no question. What role does the U.S. play?
And we could just do an entire podcast just on that.
Sure.
But here's the general sense, and I come from this from a different perspective because of my background. I think a lot of your listeners know my parents were first generation to this country. They were both born and raised in mainland China. Came through Hong Kong, when they were both at different ages, met, got married, and came to America for the American dream. So I bring a different perspective because I have visited that, not only just where they came from, but also Taiwan. So I have a deep understanding of that delicate relationship between China and Taiwan, which we have to watch. and watch very closely right now, because there's a lot of saber rattling that's going on. We just heard, the head of the Joint Command over there talking about how, China is bumping up close to some of our planes within some of those territories, our ships. That's one of the things we have to delicately watch, because that disruption, if China were ever invade Taiwan, could have not just impacts on America, worldwide impacts, because so much of those microchips are being manufactured out of Taiwan. We can't have that instability. And as a world superpower, even though under this administration we're not acting like it, it is part of our responsibility to watch out for some of our allies and support some of our allies. I'm one of those individuals that is supportive of the dollars going over to Ukraine, not just on the military side, because, look, I'm supportive of doing everything short of putting troops on the ground there. But from a humanitarian perspective, we're seeing people fleeing those countries, fleeing that war. Let's call it what it is, between Russia and Ukraine, that potential takeover of that country. And I will be supportive of that. But there's a lot of conflicts, as you mentioned, all across the globe. I'm one that we have to act like a superpower, protect and support many of our allies.
Israel-Palestine, one-state solution, two-state solution?
Two states. I'm supportive of a two-state solution, and that's where, I've always been. It's always better when you have both sides coming to table, just like, as mayor, collective bargaining. I don't want to leave it to an outside arbitrator. It's the deal across the table with both sides. They could start wide apart, but if you can come together, working through a lot of the discourse, working through a lot of those, having honest discussions based on the facts, you can come to a deal. And look, it's never perfect. Any type of deal that you come to the table with, if you can come to a compromise, both sides sometimes walking away unhappy, sometimes that's the best solutions.
Yeah, there's a lot of Palestinians that want to see a one-state solution that is based on equality versus the scenario now. But you want that two-state solution. That's where you would sit, or your position would be as such if it going into
two-state solution. And I've talked to some on the Palestinian side that are supportive of a two-state solution, because that's for me, it's always better when it's both sides at the table working together, working through some of those difficulties.
All right, here it comes. I mean, it's coming. It's.
Oh yeah, come on, throw that fastball at my head.
How do you deal with the Trump question? I mean, let's look at it from a different perspective, if we can, because it's the straightforward question is, would you support Donald Trump for president in 2024? The broader way to ask this is to be honest about it and say, look, there are two stripes of Republicans that barely comport with each other anymore. One is this sort of Trumpian version that we've seen play out, where it's policy, it's attitude, it's an energy, and there is a version of the Republican Party that still resonates from decades past that is a much more fiscally conservative type of animal, if you will. Can the two interact? And specifically, do you support President Trump if he were to run again? Would you vote for him? Would you accept his endorsement if you were to receive it now?
No. And here we go. Because the bottom line, and I've said this a long time, I'm not sure Donald Trump, is going to run for president or not. We've all seen how he acts. He loves the press, loves, that attention, likes to string things along. Bottom line is, you're talking about a guy who's bumping up on 80s if he were to jump in the race. For me, I want to see a fresh face representing the Republican Party. Individuals that are laser focused on the problems that we have right now. I don't want to focus on the past. I want someone who's, ready to address this economy, that has a plan, has an agenda, just like what I want to do, focus on energy independence, making, a lot of that product right here in America, making sure that manufacturing is brought back to America so we're not reliant upon overseas, getting people back to work. There's so much dollars in the system right now that we don't, we have, and we're seeing it here in Rhode Island in our hospitality industry. We should be the height of it right now during the summer, where tourists are flocking here, and you can't sometimes get a seat at a restaurant. Sometimes the service is slower, and I don't blame the people that show up, But this is the realities of what we're facing as a country right now. That's who I want, representing the Republican Party. And let's face it, Bill, people know who I am. 12 years as mayor. I'm one of these guys that worked across the aisle. Not afraid to throw a punch when I have to, but, I'd rather just work, consensus builder. That's who I am, problem solver, and that's the type of individual I want representing our country and the party.
Would you accept his endorsement?
I'm not asking for Trump's endorsement. Never been to Mar-a-Lago. I actually never met the guy. So, bottom line is I want a fresh face. I'm just focused on this election. I'm asking for the endorsement of the people of the 2nd Congressional District because I want to represent not just them, but Rhode Islanders.
I think it's a reasonable question, though, because, you're trying to appeal to a state that is traditionally blue. You're in a more purple district, certainly, than the 1st Congressional District. There's a lot of people that, this is anecdotal, but there's a lot of people that say, hey, maybe I do want to change, but I can't stomach the thought of being in any way, shape, or form a part of what we've seen play out with this phenomenon that Donald Trump brought to the world here. I mean, I think it's been enormously damaging to the conservative movement in terms of going forward. So I think it's a reasonable question. Would you, if he were to endorse you, would you accept it or not?
That's not going to happen. And I'm sitting here talking to the voters about what I want to do. And I can tell you the endorsement that matters are those people in the 2nd Congressional District because their focus isn't on what Donald Trump may or may not do. That's not what I'm hearing at the doors. What I'm hearing at the doors is how are you going to help fix this economy? Because, like I said, they're scared. They're not nervous. They are scared. I can tell you, I was part of that, shock when I saw the oil price, my oil bill back in April. When I just topped off my tank, it was $1,000 back then. Yeah. What's it going to be come the fall into the winter? And I'm in a different scenario than many of the individuals like my mom who are on a fixed income. That's going to be a shock value. Listen, Bill. We just heard about that potential spike that's going to come from Rhode Island Energy. That's like a 50% increase.
Yeah, $52 per bill for the average person.
Right.
Would you want to see an intervention in terms of, again, it's kind of that price control limiting the flow of capitalism at the same time when you have a monopoly, it's basically a public utility that is serving itself and its shareholders. Would you want to see intervention to say, hey, look, you cannot, the government's telling you can't raise profits here. We're going to have to manage it. You're going to have to take the hit.
And that's the job the PUC is going to have to look through that filing. But where I blame some of that blame to? Allowing that merger to happen. What do you think was going to happen? This is part of the problem, and this is the responsibility that I want to have going down to Washington, D.C., that oversight on issues like that could cause spikes, dramatic spikes, in our energy bills. This is what I'll fight for Rhode Islanders down there in Washington, D.C., and that's why, this campaign is important. I'm going to keep talking about what I want to do, trying to drive those prices down. And, this is the stuff that's unconscionable as we're coming in. But this is also the result of the policies from this Biden administration and this Pelosi Congress. And that's why I'm going down to Washington, D.C. to make sure that Rhode Islanders have a voice down there.
Last question. Let's say you get elected and you serve for, however many years. Should there be term limits in Congress?
I'm a big proponent of term limits. For me, that's why I'm no longer mayor of Cranston after, all this time, which, don't get me wrong, I loved it. But I'm also a firm believer that there should be new blood, new thoughts, new energy that's invigorated. Barbara Ann and I, when, I'm so proud of her, what she did last cycle to beat the, sitting Speaker of the House, first time in 114 years in our state's history. But as we were on the campaign trail, this question came up because this is something that, your average voter gets tired of seeing sometimes the same name. There are, I believe, 1 or 2 individuals now, because we've had some turnover, in that General Assembly when we were running that were serving longer than Barbara Ann's been alive. And that's when you sit there going, hey, buddy, come on. Yeah. Isn't it time to go? And that's where I am a proponent of term limits.
Allan Fung, he is running for Congress as a Republican in the 2nd Congressional District. As always, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Bill, for having me, and thanks to everyone. Love to have your support.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.